Jerry loaned me this camera so that I could try it, have some fun with it, make a video about it. Jerry, who has his own YouTube channel about DIY car stuff, who makes music, who trusted me with his Fujifilm FinePix S2 Pro. Thank you, sincerely. It choked on the 4GB card. I tried it first, but then I found this 64MB CF card that I bought in 1999 for $250 or so US. Couldn't figure out how to format the thing, though. There's no option to format in the S2 Pro menu. Didn't exactly find the answer online either, but something I read got me thinking in a particular direction, and I figured it out. You just hit play, like you're going to view an image, even if there's no image on the card, and then you hit the menu OK button, and the format option pops up. It's just something you have to know, apparently. But this 64MB card will hold roughly 11 images in highest quality JPEG, which kind of reminds me of shooting 6x7 medium format film, where I'd get 10 frames per roll of 120. I do have other memory cards with me, but first I choose to live within this limitation for a while, because it can be fun, rewarding. But I won't be shooting it like it's a film camera. I will be referring to the screen on the back as often as I like. I believe the eyepiece is missing on this particular camera. The S2 Pro was released in 2002, so rather than thinking film, I'm going to be shooting this as though today were 2002. Certainly one of the coolest aspects of having a digital SLR in 2002 would have been the ability to view the images immediately on the back screen. Make determinations about what to keep, what to delete, because space was extremely non-abundant, expensive. And when you only get 10 or 11 shots, and you can delete, I suppose you get kind of choosy. I felt this one was fine, but as it represents 10% of the total of photographs I can take, I thought maybe something a little more straightforward would be better. But I don't know. Tough call. So because some of these are being deleted at the source, they obviously did not make it home with me, so I cannot show them on screen. Therefore, after I fill the 64MB card, we will then look at all the images that I decided to keep. And it did have a misfire or two. Shot a test shot or two, deleted those. I won't make you watch every single bit of minutia that I carry out with the camera. But besides a few of those sorts of things, I'm showing everything. I don't know if that last shot was anything, so I took another crack at it. The second one's worse, the exposure is way off. I ended up deleting both of them. But although I had been shooting an aperture priority up till now, I figured maybe the time was right now to try manual. I don't know what happens to me in a situation like this. Same thing as with film. But like a few frames in, I start to get a little bit more desperate or lower my standards. I don't know, like I just feel pressure to fill the card, and I start taking shots that just are not that interesting, of which that last one definitely qualifies. I would say this one does as well. Without even seeing the shot, that just looks pretty boring. And yeah, it's pretty boring. I think I keep this one, but I deleted that first one. So I'm switching from this variable aperture 24 to 120, which sells for about $50 used, to this 50mm 1.8, which sells for about $80 used, US. This is an APS-C camera, 6-megapixel native resolution, but the camera is doing some sort of internal interpolation, giving you a 12-megapixel file. How it's actually accomplishing that is sort of interesting to read about, but I don't feel comfortable enough with my understanding of it to try to spew it back out. I definitely felt super awkward with this camera for a lot of reasons. A little bit like a beginner. But I love that. I love breaking my routine. See, here's evidence that there is no format option in the menu. It's the weirdest thing. But then you hit function, and you've got this top screen where you control everything related to the way the images look. And I love that. Wish every camera was designed with that idea in mind. It's exactly as brilliant as leaving format out of the menu is baffling. Max shutter speed on this camera is 1/4000th of a second, which is typical of cameras in this price range from this time. The price range being about $2,500 US. I was just looking online trying to get a current used price. There's quite a price difference, a variation I mean, between lowest and highest, more so than a lot of other cameras. And it's a little bit harder to find than a lot of other cameras. Not impossible to find. There are certainly some floating around, but somewhere between $100, $200 US, it looks like. Most of the digital cameras I've ever owned have had a max shutter speed of 1/8000th of a second. And that's often not fast enough for me. And I do not have any ND filters that will fit these lenses. And stopping down is a problem. We'll get to that. Yeah, making determinations about what to keep and what not to keep. It's a big question mark because it's hard to make those determinations off the screen that I have available. But, this is all part of the fun for me. None of this is a complaint. I love having to work around this stuff. The ISO range goes from 100 to 1600. I never had it above 400, and at 400 it looked fine. I actually expected it to be noisier. It looked pretty clean. This has dual memory card slots, which is cool. One is SmartMedia, one is compact flash. But it doesn't have dual card slots in the way that you would probably hope for. It doesn't have the functionality you would probably expect, in that you cannot write to them both simultaneously. It's an either-or scenario. Jerry also sent this manual focus 35mm lens that belonged to his dad. He says he thinks his dad bought it in the Navy in the 1960s. I was super excited about it, also a little intimidated, because there are no manual focus assist tools on this DSLR, as far as I know. But I couldn't get the thing to work, so it didn't really even matter. So I went back to the 50mm lens, but now it won't fire either. The fuck does FEE mean? But I kind of realized, / remembered, that because this lens has a manual aperture ring, and the camera controls aperture electronically, you do have to set it at the smallest opening in order to hand over control, so that the camera can then control it electronically. Just again, I'm feeling that film behavior taking over. I don't know what that's about. But a few frames in, I start to get desperate, lower my standards because I feel like I have so far to go. And then at the end of a roll of film, I end up shooting like 3 shots that look basically the same, of a similar subject. That's exactly what I've done here. Don't know what that's about. Very frustrating. But we made it to the end of our 64MB card. We got our 10 or 11 shots, whatever it is. Let's take a look. And then maybe pick up the pace a little bit. I don't know. Boy, we're starting out weak. I guess that one's fine. This one has too much detail in the center and the background. I imagined it coming out a bit more overexposed, and I think that would have been better. Yes, symmetry is a thing that exists. Well done, Nicholas. Yep, I'm sure of it now. Symmetry does indeed exist. That has been fully established now. Ugh, that is just as boring as I feared, if not more so. Kind of like that one. I like this separation with this leaf that goes through the frame, like cuts through the middle of the frame. I like that. I have a feeling I may have deleted a similar one that would have been superior. But whatever. That's the best shot so far. No, that is the best shot so far. So maybe it was good that I repeated myself here at the end. And we have a winner. I actually really, really, really like that shot. Cool. At least I got 1 out of 10. That's decent. Thankfully, as an alternative to the 64MB reality we've been living in, we live in the far distant future where 256MB cards exist. Can you imagine all that space? Now we're spoiled. This is too much. I don't feel that I'm reviewing this camera. I feel that I'm using this camera, I'm documenting that process, giving my thoughts. Granted, maybe that's a review, by definition. But there's a difference there. For me, it's the difference between having fun and not having fun. Because I basically like every camera anyway, and I don't really have any biting critical things to say. Though, I was annoyed with this camera at first, for like the first 10 minutes, something like that. Before even getting out of the house with it, when I was just snapping a photo of my cat. There was some initial hurdle I had to get past. But now I'm having ridiculous amounts of childlike fun with it. Perhaps I will get into those annoyances in a bit. Largely they stem from my background being mostly Canon, so they're just specific to my own experience and expectation. Dumb stuff, but maybe I'll get into it. I don't get that worked up about gear. What I mean is I don't come down on any particular side of any particular debate. Gear is just more granular for me. One piece at a time. Granted, one decision leads to the next and so on, but it could just as well be another way, in my opinion, for all I care. For example, I think there's some great stuff to explore in the old and used category. Some of it is surprisingly practical. Some of it's probably more just for fun. Depends largely on your use case, but it's worth a look before jumping straight to new and expensive. Yes, I feel that strongly. And I have regrets related to not figuring that out sooner, but new and expensive is great too, and has its place. I'm not a zealot either way. And though I may not be a zealot myself, I'm not really even bothered by camera zealotry. If you know what you like, that's great. The only thing that really bothers me a little is brand loyalty. Because this company that you love so much literally doesn't care that you exist. Or rather only to the extent that they can take your money away from you, and then do it again and again. And that sort of unrequited love hurts my heart. It may seem like I have that for Canon, but I really don't. You have to pick a brand because your lenses need to fit in some kind of a camera hole reliably. Truthfully, if there is any brand that I do experience warm fuzzies for, it's Fuji, and I've never even owned one. I've just admired from afar. But I'm so intrigued with their GFX line for like slow-paced landscapes and such. Intrigued by their X100 series too, for kind of portable, informal, I just so happen to have a camera with me, photos of my own life and family. Super jealous of their in-camera film simulations too. But I started my wedding photography career on a Fuji DSLR, which belonged to the studio I worked for. Wish I could remember which one. Something from this era for sure. In fact, this camera is definitely bringing the memory of that experience back. A very similar experience from what I can remember. Fuji built this camera on a Nikon film body, the N80 or F80 depending on your location in the world, but with Fuji sensor electronics menu. And as such, this camera uses the Nikon F mount. This particular camera does have a bit of an issue. On Nikon F mount cameras, the camera body has an aperture control lever that stops the lens down when you take the photo. And if the arm isn't working, the camera can't stop the lens down. It just stays wide open. But the camera electronics, of course, don't know that, so if you set the exposure for a smaller aperture, take the shot, it'll be overexposed, and then you'll get an error. Shutting off the camera cleared the error. Maybe changing the aperture would have too. I didn't try. Either way, I figured the better strategy would be just to avoid the error going forward. Jerry warned me about this and mentioned an interesting workaround, but I didn't really try it. I was mostly fine shooting wide open or close to it. Weirdly, I found that I didn't have to shoot entirely wide open. I could stop down by a little, like from 3.5 to 5.6 or from 1.8 to 2.8, but I couldn't push it beyond that. After doing a bit of research, I found that that probably means the aperture lever isn't completely broken, but it's just either sticking, only moving part way. It's spring-loaded, so another possibility is that the spring mechanism isn't applying enough force to fully close the aperture. Again, I cannot express the extent to which I love that there's a screen and set of buttons dedicated to dialing in the look of the images. Now there are some bafflingly terrible abbreviations. STD evidently means standard. ORG, original, I think. Tone equals contrast. And the gigantic S means sharpening. Cool that you can lock your settings. I also really like that this camera runs on AA's. So cheap, available everywhere. Really cool. I wish every camera ran on AA's. That's not the end of the story, though. There is something weird. So there's a second set of batteries. These CR123A batteries power the Nikon components, autofocus, shutter, metering. The good news is those batteries last an awfully long time, months at least. This camera's got FireWire, which would have been really exciting at the time. DC input, analog video out, and some type of USB. And that circle at the top is a PC sync port for connecting external flashes. Just unscrew it. This is how you control the autofocus points. It's a really nice method, and I love how clear the autofocus points are. I struggle a little bit sometimes to see them with Canon. These are extremely visible. This is very definitely better. It's not the most amazing autofocus, certainly not the quickest, and I'm sure that has more to do with the lens than the camera's autofocus system itself, but it's all really good and really usable. And each one of them seems basically as usable as the others. I did not in particular notice that the center one, for example, was just outperforming the others. It may be the case, but in my practical, real-world usage, I did not find it to be the case. I thought the autofocus was really quite good. But here's my biggest gripe, and yes, I guess this is a Canon-centric point of view, but look at the light meter. See how it's all the way to the left? That somehow means overexposed on this camera. Left should clearly be underexposed, because alphanumerically we proceed from left to right, under to over, 0 to 10 to 100. Left would go in the negative direction, darker, darker, darker. Right should be brighter, brighter, brighter. It's fucking horrendous, and I refuse. So I found a couple of images from my first month of wedding photography, when I sucked and didn't know what I was doing. And look at which camera I shot this on, the FinePix S2 Pro from Fujifilm, this camera. So I do have history with this camera. That is crazy. And I mentioned just recently in a video how I came to wedding photography completely ignorant of how to shoot a wedding, of how to shoot portraits. I had been doing photojournalism for maybe a year and a half before this, and I did not know what I was doing as a wedding photographer. But the one thing I had to offer that my coworkers were not doing was kind of more experimental stuff, dragging the shutter and whatnot. I also found this photo, which isn't actually that bad, considering I didn't know what the fuck I was doing. But it led me to this church where I shot this in 2004. I thought that was really cool. Looks a little different because they deleted the large bushes, but otherwise basically the same. But those are the only images I have from that wedding. I didn't really keep much from that time. I also noticed I didn't really nail focus in any of those, but that's because I sucked. Didn't know what I was doing. It also got me thinking how I was shooting those images in black and white directly off the camera. We were not doing RAW at the time. JPEG, just like now. And wouldn't it be fun to revisit that? Let's shoot some black and white straight out of camera. It's about the middle of the day, so that's the perfect time with this harsh light to do some black and white. So let's do it, yo. Seriously though, I just cannot get over the fact that this is the same camera I started my wedding photography career with. I didn't think there was any way I would ever find out what camera that was. I had been wondering for years, but it was just a detail lost to history. Kinda special to me to be using this camera again after all these years. I thought I saved 0 images from that period of time. Evidently I saved 4. Accidentally, I guess. I started shooting aperture priority at the very beginning of this. Saw an exposure or two I was not happy with. Switched to manual. But, okay, it's silly and I'm being cranky, yes. It was that light meter that made the process of shooting in manual really frustrating to me. And I would sort of alternate between aperture priority and manual. I guess if I used it long enough, I could get used to the light meter being backwards from my perspective. I mean, the lenses mount backwards from my perspective too, and that's, I don't know, that takes an adjustment. But I also understand there's no logical reason that the way I'm used to is the correct way. Not so with a light meter. I think it's very clearly counterintuitive the way it exists on the Fuji. And apparently the whole Nikon line to this day. Sorry, I didn't mean to insult so many people's taste in light meters. It's just an opinion. And anyway, I'm enjoying the Fuji, regardless. So it just is the way it is. Let's go back to doing the 64 megabyte card thing. That was a lot of fun. This time with one difference, though. Let's just not delete anything. Whatever I get, and we go with that. Might actually result in an improvement of the photography. If I just take deleting off the table, I concentrate on getting it right the first time. I mean, I'm not going to be like super rigid about it if I need a test shot to dial in exposure, or if I misfire or something. Accidentally take 2 instead of 1. Fine, I'll delete, but when I know the shot I'm going after and I take the shot that is to be the shot, that will just be that, and I will move on. No deleting. I'm loving being out in the middle of the day. I don't do a lot of that. I need to start. I'm loving the foreign nature of the camera. I'm loving the impromptu decision to shoot black and white. Just having a really good time today. Even getting used to that light meter, I suppose. Look, no, I mentioned it earlier. I meant it. I still mean it. I love working around issues. Heading straight on into uncomfortable territory. Even the annoyance of the light meter is fun to me to some degree. I hate it, but I like it. The first film SLR I ever owned was a Nikon. Used one, no idea which. That was so long ago. I don't think I even knew what a light meter was. And my time with that camera was brief. I have a little Nikon DSLR experience too. Very little though, and still a long time ago. But I liked it. It was a good experience. I mean, apparently I shot on this very camera, and I don't recall the light meter direction being a problem on any of those cameras. So, strange. Maybe I was just more flexible in my thinking back then. But to wrap up a previous point, I also experience warm fuzzies for Olympus. My mom shot an Olympus. And to me, growing up, the name Olympus was synonymous with unimaginably awesome, unattainable camera of the gods. So it's not brand loyalty, but Fuji and Olympus are both really cool brands that, if money were no object, I would dive into and explore. So I took this shot because I thought this arrangement of trees was interesting. I walked up a few more steps and I saw maybe a better arrangement of trees, but I resisted. I don't think those last 2 shots are going to be worth anything. I was also puzzled by the APS-C switch on the front of the camera. Sure, it's obvious to Nikon shooters. I even had the instruction manual out there and I found the verbiage really confusing. M is obviously manual focus, and I'm guessing S for single shot, C for continuous autofocus. Just a guess. I did read something online that said C stood for focus on the closest object. That can't be right, can it? Yeah, I'm looking at the manual right now. I was right the first time. My reading comprehension is just really poor, but that paragraph dealing with it in the manual is particularly badly written. So here are a couple of other things I noticed about the S2 Pro. The buttons on the back of the camera will not wake the camera up. Only the shutter release button will wake the camera up, which is not great. So you're carrying the camera around, the camera goes to sleep, you hit the play button on the back of the camera to look at the last image, and nothing happens, and nothing ever will happen until you hit the shutter release button to wake it up, and then hit the play button. And here I'm just debating. I had taken a shot of this cracked mud texture from far away, and I wondered if I should have taken it from close up. But again, I resisted the temptation to reshoot it. There was something I liked in the shot I took, which was like almost a straight line crack that I placed right in the center of the frame, and I wouldn't have been able to replicate that anyway. So again, just going to go with what I shot the first time. And I wasn't actively avoiding looking at the images this time around. It's more that it was just very, very sunny and I could not find shade, and in the sun It's just really hard to make any kind of value judgment. But overall, I feel good about what I shot, with the exception of the 2 photos I think I mentioned, kind of right in the middle. At least this time there was a reason to want to hurry up and get done, because I was kind of cooking in the sun. Thankfully, I actually remembered to wear sunscreen. But let's look at the images on a computer. I really like it, like the 1950s alien probe behind a fence. Here we are in Area 51 or something. But I'm digging the black and white. That shot's not great. It's okay. But overall, the black and white, outstanding. I love that shot. And the technique is kind of amateurish looking. It's going to be hard to explain what I'm responding to, but here goes. It looks like a snapshot from a life I never lived, and that's the best I can do. And this is a shit photo of nothing, followed by another shit photo of nothing. But that one I like. That's pretty cool. You know, that shot I loved so much before, if I could add on to that, I think it's because it doesn't look like I shot it, maybe. Like, that may well be the first time ever that I was able to get out of my own way, if that makes sense. There's just no pretense in it. And I only just now noticed that Jerry included this SmartMedia Card with the camera. That would have been fun to shoot on. And it's a 32 megabyte card. Even though I did go back out and get a few more shots, I ultimately decided not to use it. I don't have a cord with that wacky small USB connector on it. And I have neither a FireWire cord or a FireWire device. Certainly don't have a card reader. Might have been fun if I had noticed in the beginning, but it's a little too late now. The camera goes back today. Links to some of Jerry's online stuff, Instagram, YouTube, music, that's going to be in the description. Please look him up. I adore his YouTube channel, and I'm clueless about cars. And he's an exceptional author and executor of music. Tends to be heavy music with synth. I said earlier that I don't think of what I do with cameras as reviewing them. But of course, this kind of became the most review-like video of a camera I think I've ever done. But it just happened that way, organically. But to that end, let me say the following. There is a pretty large discrepancy between what you see in the viewfinder and the image you're actually capturing, which is certainly not unique to this camera, but it is particularly pronounced on this camera, a bit worse than I've maybe seen in any other camera. That is, you're capturing more than you're seeing in the viewfinder, so the viewfinder can throw your composition off a bit. And the screen on the back is pretty bad. I mean, by 2002 standards, it was probably an incredible screen, so it's usable. It's even okay-ish, but not good. But so that combination could be a deal breaker for you. The viewfinder is also a bit small and far away. So you get the feeling that you can't quite know what you're getting in the viewfinder, and looking at the images on the screen is less helpful than you'd probably hope. So in terms of knowing what you're getting, knowing what you got, you can certainly get a general sense of it, but it leaves an awful lot to the imagination. Right, so I don't think of this as a practical camera for doing pro work today, although you certainly could. You could do pro work on just about any camera, but some old cameras are just very clearly better choices, if that's your goal. As a camera for fun, endless fun, like legit serious fun, a quirky, charming relic from a time when camera companies were doing these sorts of collaboration camera bodies in the early days of the transition from film to digital. I don't see it getting much better than this, and from that perspective, absolutely everything I've complained about just becomes part of the fun, and I really mean that, even the light meter. The truth is, if I owned it, I probably would use it for pro work. I wouldn't be able to resist. It's just that I wouldn't want to be in a situation where that were the only camera available to me for pro work. So I'm on my way to send the camera back. And look at this. That 35mm manual lens works fine. You just have to switch to manual. Manual exposure, that is. So I couldn't send it back without at least taking one photograph on Jerry's dad's lens. It's really a shame. Probably would have been a lot of fun to explore this lens in detail.